August 23rd, 2009. We're interviewing Hannah Michelman Pistrich. Hannah. Pistrich is a second marriage.
Hannah, can you tell me who your parents were and when they came to Springfield?
My father, how is he listed here?
As you remember him.
Louis Israel Michelman. His father was Isaac, who lived in the area of Northampton. Leeds, Florence, that area. His family settled in. My grandmother, if I can find her here. Dora Bernstein. I know that she came to America sometime in the late 19th century. Living with her husband in the Northampton, or maybe they didn't speak of it as Northampton, it was the Leeds and Florence area.
Do you know what brought them to this area? Why did they settle here?
That I do not know.
Do you know what they did for a living?
My grandfather would have to have been a peddler. What else?
Do you know what he
At that
peddled
time.
by chance?
No. Might have been clothing, because later on he set up a clothing store in Northampton.
Do you remember the name of the store?
Probably Michelman's
On Main Street.
on Main Street. I believe my son, Stephen, has a picture of the front on Main Street in Northampton, which perhaps he will be bringing.
What did your parents do for a living?
My parents, my father, had a clothing store in Greenfield initially, and then went into business, hosiery business, with some acquaintance in New York City. It was the Great Depression time.
So he went down to New York
He
City?
went to New York, yes.
Did he come back then?
He kept his family in Greenfield, where he had established the clothing store, and the family remained there for several years while he was trying to establish himself in business in New York.
But he did come back, did I get that right, to Greenfield?
Came back to Greenfield only momentarily, and then moved his family to Westchester County, New York.
Where in
Where
Westchester was that?
Mount Vernon,
Oh, sure.
yes.
Can you remember Mount Vernon at all?
Not really, although I was about 6 years old when we moved there, and of course continued schooling through almost all of high school. The final year I spent with my family, having moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, so that I finished my high schooling in Springfield.
What brought them back to Springfield?
I would say, I do not know, because parents didn't discuss things in front of their children pretty much when they were that serious, but business. Lack of business. He had to do something else.
Did he go back into the clothing business?
No.
What did he do then?
Did something with I believe I would call it money lending. I don't know what else to give it. what they called the loan business, I think,
sure.
at that time.
Uh-huh. And where in Springfield did you live then? Do you remember the street number, name and number?
I believe it was 83 Randolph Street,
And what section of town was that in? Was
Forest
that
Park.
in Forest
In
Park?
Forest Park area, right. Within what I would call walking distance of the Kadima Synagogue at that time. I'm trying to remember the name of the street, but I
Congress Street, maybe?
no.
Yeah. But it was a round building, a round top to it.
Yes, yes, a very handsome, traditional.
So did your father
Building.
go to Kadima?
Yes, he was a member of the Kadima Synagogue, and also he joined the Bethel Synagogue at that time, so that we were members of both congregations.
Can you remember going to Kadima
Yes.
or to Bethel?
I can remember going to Kadima because we, as a girl, a young woman, I had to sit upstairs with my mother. It was traditional,
Yeah, so your father was Orthodox.
yes,
Uh-huh.
but he was flexible. He was modern. Interestingly,
Yeah.
I think it was unusual for a man who had been brought up in the tradition to feel willing to be flexible with his views.
Do you remember going to Hebrew school?
I do.
Do you remember the name of the Hebrew school or where it was?
The Hebrew school that I attended in Massachusetts was they had not yet united. So
But you remember Bethel.
I do remember somewhat Bethel. I may be confusing my past and
That's quite okay.
my more recent.
And do you remember any
Past.
of the rabbis from your time at Kadima?
Rabbi Klein,
Uh-huh.
Isaac Klein, who
Right.
was very fine gentleman, very impressive.
This is from Kadima.
Kadima,
Yeah.
yes.
And can you remember some of the names of other Jewish families that lived near you?
Oh dear,
Just some of your friends, the children, or their parents?
I'm not sure I can. Springfield, Massachusetts. I remember one name only at this moment, and for no other reason than that it was a family who lived not too far from our home on Randolph Street, Forest Park Avenue. And it was a family that we met early in our living on that street, in that city, Glasser, because they had a daughter who was almost my age, so that we were able to be friendly. George Glasser. This is one of my remarkable finds.
Can you
The
remember?
daughter
Yeah.
was Esther.
And did you attend high school in Springfield?
Yes, my senior year, classical high.
Do you remember if you felt different at all or special being Jewish in this high school? Do you have any recollection of that
I
sense
remember
of...
that there was no acceptance. One didn't, I don't suppose one had to display the fact that one was Jewish, but the people around you did not particularly accept you. There was some standoffishness. A few people accepted me. For the most part, I was not particularly welcomed as a newcomer to the school. I came in as a senior in the high school. Nobody knew me. nobody cared to know me.
Mhm.
I was not an extraordinary person. Mostly in the honors classes, I think. It was only 1 year, a brief year.
And what did you do then after you finished high school?
Went off to college,
Where did you go to school?
Wheaton near Boston.
Was that unusual for a young Jewish woman in that
To
community
go to Wheaton,
to go to college?
to go to college. Perhaps so. But as I has come as a newcomer and a foreigner, you might say, didn't matter whether it was from New York State, it could have been from anywhere. But it was very hard to make an established place for me as a newcomer. And then going away to college, which was a little premature. I was very young. Probably should not have gone so soon, but I had, after all, graduated high school and had the requisite grades or whatever was required for admission to the college. So I went. But it was during the war,
That's what I thought.
the war years. Everything made a difference. Everything was upside down.
Did your mother work?
No,
Do you have siblings?
I had 2 brothers,
Can you tell me their names and what they did?
Isaac and Maurice.
What did Isaac and Maurice do for a living? And where did they live?
Isaac lived for a time outside of Boston, let's see, somewhere in the Lawrence, that's not completely accurate. Lowell, Lawrence, Methuen, that area. What was your other question?
What did he do for a living?
Living. For a time, he manufactured men's hosiery. I'm at a loss.
I think you said he had like a sock factory in Lowell or something at one
He
point,
was,
and that went under.
Yes, it failed. Ultimately, business was not good for a burgeoning, how's that for a word, coming from the depths. He didn't have enough experience. He had just come, well, World War II was over,
Did he fight in the
and
war?
he was a paratrooper. Yes.
Before D-Day, they paratrooped in to Normandy.
He was one of
He
them?
was one of them, and he's
Yes.
written up a little bit in this book called Night Drop
That's right.
about that night before
D-Day.
D-Day.
That's
And
correct.
he got injured somehow.
Severely, and then was, whatever it's called, phased out of because of medical
Right.
need.
How about Maurice?
Maurice, I didn't mention anything about college for Isaac, but he attended University of Pennsylvania, the business component. What is it called? The
Wharton
School. How about that? Thank you.
He also went to, didn't he go to Deerfield Academy?
Not Isaac.
No.
Maury did.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
Maury. Maurice, commonly known, better known as Maury. And where am I now? I'm lost.
Maury, where he went to
Where he
Deerfield?
went to school.
He went to
He did.
Deerfield Academy?
Yes, he did. And then he went to Cornell University. Became a city planner
Oh,
by
very nice.
profession, and he worked for the government in Washington. I guess his entire adult life, actually.
And after you finished college? where
After
did-
I finished,
Yeah, where did you go to?
I went to graduate school at Simmons College.
No,
No,
in what?
that would have been really smart, but I wasn't that smart. I went into the business department.
That sounds even smarter.
Perhaps I became a secretary
Uh-huh.
to a law firm in Boston. I remember their name, the law firm. Imagine. But this is from my
I've
son's.
never heard it. What is this?
Goulston and Stores. I heard the name on the TV news the other day for some reason.
Was this a Jewish law firm?
I would say basically, but not completely, because Mr. Goulston definitely was not Jewish that I know of. No, Mr. Stores, who I never met because he preceded all of the
Right.
people of that era.
So you worked in this law firm?
I did, and 1 year was quite enough. I was bored to death. So I went to Radcliffe to study art history, and after one semester there, I decided I didn't like that either. I was tired of learning dates.
Mm-hmm.
Seemed to have no valid reason. Anyway, I left, and shortly after that, I married.
How did you meet your husband?
At during the time that I was at Radcliffe, there were opportunities to meet, how should we say, very able young people in one aspect or another. And I would say that at this point, I met a young man who was waiting on table in what they called it, a refectory at that time of the dormitory where I was living, and a very fine young man with great potential, and we had 4 years together before he was
Hired by the CIA.
He was
mysteriously died. At
thank
a
you.
young age.
Are you serious?
No,
That's
it
the-
is
that's
it
the
is
dramatic
actual.
sounding story.
What's
It is
that?
actual. He was hired by the CIA, and he went to Washington. I went to live with my parents while he was getting settled and establishing an apartment for me and our first daughter, while I was expecting a second child
Uh-huh.
and living in Springfield with my parents. You don't want to hear me go through my drama.
I do.
You do. Would you like to hear my drama? In the midst of the night,
Yeah.
I was awakened by a phone call. Might have been 4 in the morning, I can't remember actually, of course. But I was told that my husband, who was temporarily staying at the YMCA in D.C., was dead. That he had just died,
Just like that,
just like that.
with no history of illness.
No.
How old was he?
And he was like, I don't know,
30.
I'm going to say 24 years old.
Uh-huh. And you had one child already,
I had
a
one
daughter?
child and was expecting another.
What's the daughter's name?
The first child,
Yeah,
Rebecca,
Rebecca.
and
And
the
the second
second
child?
child is Martha
Martha. What is the last name of, what was your husband's name?
Jameson.
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 His first name?
Howard,
Howard Jameson.
yes. He was,
Mm.
he had his master's degree in government, I believe, from Harvard. He had been schooled at Hamilton College in New York.
So here you were with two girls living
two
in
girls.
Springfield with your parents.
That's right.
What a situation to be in. Wow.
Well, it wasn't much fun.
No.
And then I was introduced to a young man from Montreal who was working in Springfield, or in the area anyway, and he seemed to be affable and was working for a local firm as an engineer, electrical engineer. And I decided to take up his offer of marriage.
What was his name?
Archer Pistrich
From Montreal.
from Montreal.
What did you know about his family and his parents?
I knew nothing.
What did you find out about them? How did they end up in Montreal?
I suppose the same way my parents or grandparents ended up in
Okay.
Florence, Massachusetts. Who knows?
So you were living
I
with
don't
your
know.
parents. Did you and this gentleman find a house, an apartment together?
We did
Where did you move to?
Springfield.
What part?
I think at that time it was called East Forest Park. I don't think it is any longer called that.
Do you know the street name?
South Branch Parkway,
Why did you decide to move to that place in particular?
because there was a house that
Mhm.
had facilities that could accommodate a family of 4.
Uh-huh. So
I
you-
think that's the only reason.
so you rented
and
a
it was
house.
out in the wilderness.
Well, at that point, it
at
was
that
the wilderness.
Absolutely. It was an unpaved road that was periodically scraped by the Springfield Park Department to make it negotiable. Sometimes it was so bad that as our elder daughter grew and was able to attend the public school in that area, which had been planned to be usable, couldn't go to school because she couldn't get through the mud.
This is 1950s, it sounds like, at this point, yes?
Yes.
1950s.
Yeah, no phone.
Pardon?
Only since
Oh,
we were-
well, we
No
had no
phone?
telephone. No, for 2 years we had no telephone.
You were in the wilderness.
That's what I'm saying. It was indeed the wilderness.
In 1950s. This
Well,
area.
50s.
the telephone company announced finally that they had the, whatever kind of wire they need to set up connections. There had been a storm at the Cape,
Mhm.
and they needed it to
Right.
reconstitute the telephone system there.
Uh-huh.
And so we gave up our phone for another year.
Did your husband belong to a synagogue? Was he a synagogue goer?
Yes.
Which synagogue did you decide to join?
I am assuming that it was Kadima at that time. I don't
Was
know,
that choice?
but I'm not absolutely certain. I know our elder daughter was attending the schooling that they provided at that time.
Uh-huh.
And there was no recognizing that we lived in the wilderness of Springfield on South Branch Parkway at that time. The gentleman, trying to remember his name, was it Abramson, was connected with that synagogue. Do you?
I remember meeting in Abramson.
I think it was,
Reverend
I would
Abrams.
just say
Herman
Reverend,
Abrams.
thank you.
I had to write his name or
Ab-
something once.
You did it well. Reverend Herman Abramson, yes, who later, of course, became connected with the Bethel contingent. He was accustomed to doing all kinds of good things, good deeds, and he knew that our daughter needed schooling. And he came to our home every school day from wherever he lived. I don't even know, but somewhere, I imagine, in the Forest Park area of Springfield. And he picked up our daughter, brought her to the Kadima synagogue, where there was a class apparently available for her. I feel very much out of this recollection. I haven't
Okay.
traced through it for a
Yeah.
long time. So if I sound very hesitant, along with my age and decrepitness,
When were you born?
at the end of 1922. How old am I?
You're in your 80s, I think.
Yes, I think so.
87.
What? What did you say?
About
It's
87?
86 or
Suggest
going on
86.
7.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh,
December
think.
9th.
yeah. And where are you currently living?
In Long Meadow,
Are you living in your own home?
yes, the home that
You moved with
we
Archer?
moved with as he was known as Archie.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I never called him that, but that was his name.
He wanted everyone to rate
We
Archie.
we had I can't count very well. 5 children.
There's another one still?
There's a bunch of them.
Uh-huh. So you needed a
So
bigger
we-
house?
So we needed a bigger
So
house.
you moved from
And
East
we-
Forest Park to
and-
Long Meadow?
That's right.
Why did you pick Long Meadow?
Why?
Why?
Because of the tax situation. The taxes had been increased in Springfield to some exorbitant rate, and we needed more space. We investigated with an architect to enlarge the home we were in, thinking that would be the simplification of all. But it wasn't satisfactory. We didn't think it would be workable. And so we looked for a home. The tax rate in Long Meadow, for some reason or other, was extremely low compared to at least the new tax rate in Springfield.
Are we talking about the 1960s now?
We must be.
63.
63?
Thank you.
So are there lots of Jewish people now in Long Meadow at that point? Or are you one of the
No,
new first comers?
probably rather early.
Because there were restrictions on Jewish people, I think, coming to Long Meadow.
That's possible. That I did not know about.
I think so, yeah. So you got there in the early 60s. You built your own house, or you
No.
bought a house? You bought a
It
house.
was ready. It had 4 bedrooms. 4 bedrooms. It was on one floor,
Uh-huh.
which meant for a mother of 5, it was helpful to have one's children all on one level with the parents, and furthermore, very essential to a mother who's in charge of her family, a laundry available on the same floor as everybody was situated. And so we have the longest house, perhaps in Long Meadow.
What
I don't
street
know.
is it on?
It's called Shady Side Drive.
And what are the cross streets to it? What's it near?
There aren't any cross streets. It is a
Deep
like a
woods.
semicircle that touches Deep Woods Drive, both at the bottom of the street and the top of the street. It just is a narrow circle, and it's the final street in Long Meadow.
Oh,
I can say that, I think. The last street. Well,
It's on the East Long Meadow line.
it abuts
okay, East Long Meadow.
Yeah,
Remind me, what did you tell me that your husband did for a living?
he's an electrical engineer.
Electrical engineer.
And toward the latter part of his life, he became more of a business.
He has a card that says sales manager for
I don't know.
tuners at FW Sickles
Thank you.
in Chicopee.
Electrical contractors?
Yeah, they did,
They made components for what, televisions?
yeah, tuners and,
All-
I
As the
think he said one's bomb fuses for the government.
whatever was needed.
Uh-huh.
That it was a big firm.
How long now is your husband gone?
I would say
About.
approximately 3 years.
Oh, sorry, so it's pretty recent. Yeah,
I might call it recent.
in the whole span of, how old a man did he become?
91,
4.
94.
94. And so you lived
I-
together
I've-
in the house?
I've lost
It's okay.
contact.
You've lived together in the house, together.
This is a glass
That's a glass? and
made of
that's-
another material.
Do you still sometimes go to synagogue?
Almost never.
What was
Occasionally,
synagogue
yeah.
like for you as an experience?
I was very comfortable with it. I had known it all my life. Well, except for my youngest years.
In terms of your children and grandchildren, did they remain Jewish? Did they marry Jewish people? We'd like to ask, we'd like to know
yes,
next generation.
I do think so. These two young men are not married, but I don't know what their future holds for them. But
Your daughters?
I have five children, right? 2 sons, 3 daughters.
Uh-huh.
So the eldest daughter has tried marriage 3 or 4 times,
Uh-huh.
and she is currently unmarried,
Does she have children?
no children.
Okay.
The second daughter has been divorced once and is now remarried, no children. The third daughter has 2 daughters, married. She is currently living in California.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
She raising the children Jewish?
She's raising the children, shall we say, in a peripheral way, Jewish. They are not non-Jewish, but they do not have the funds to allow them to join a synagogue. And so they remain outside of Jewishness, really, except for what my daughter Lucy remembers and holds dear to her and wants for her children to have the connection. She's married to a Jewish man, but again, he didn't have a Jewish background, really, mainly because of, well, I suppose I could say poverty. One has to have monies in order to belong to a synagogue. Most places.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe it's more maybe.
They make exceptions sometimes.
Perhaps sometimes.
Is there some advice or something you'd like to say that, from your life, that you would say to your grandchildren about life, about your life, a perspective, some words you'd like to say?
I had not thought of that. In California now, the switch from the East Coast to the West Coast came as a need, what should we say? Well, let's go back a bit, 2 steps backward. The elder daughter was born normally, but when she was 3 years old, she began to a good word would be to help me with the word. She developed problems. She no longer could learn.
Cognitive
Cognitive problems, and no one could decide what the problem was. They investigated autism, which was and still is, I guess, a possibility for some situations. It doesn't seem to be
specific, clear thing. Well, it's just not specifically labelable that simply. But I guess that's the word that seems closest.
How old is she now? About?
She's 19.
Oh, she's 19.
She just graduated high school in California, special school,
Uh-huh.
in the school system. And she's already enrolled in, what's it called? Like a junior college. I don't know if that's the name.
Community college.
That's what they call it today, community college. How she will manage, I do not know. Her mother's at her side all the time to support and seek out possibilities for this child. to be able to function in society to some degree, trying to find a friend, a female friend, a male friend, any friend who would be reliable. It's very difficult to find opportunities for her to function in the community in some way, to have a part-time job, hopefully paying, but
It's
more
a very
likely not.
difficult
She
situation.
works in a grocery store. She can put carriages back in their place when they're scattered in the parking lot. She can package goods, so on. She sometimes has been the mainstay of the family. It is very costly to live there. One cannot live there unless one is well prepared. And of course my daughter and her husband didn't recognize that when they went.
How
But
about
they
her
did.
sister? How is she
The
doing?
sister is doing very nicely in high school. She has one more year to go, and she is studying drama. That's why they're there. That was the focus. They thought, I say they thought, they hoped that her understanding of her own capacities would help her to find a place in this unusual part of the world. Oh,
Closer to
they,
Hollywood.
I see, closer to Hollywood, that makes
perhaps,
sense.
I don't think she was thinking, can I call him wizard? I can only think of
He
wizard.
does something with
He
computers.
does
the
something
son-in-law.
with computers.
Uh-huh. And he travels to Tennessee
and,
to work.
and so for a time, Tennessee shipped him back and forth to California every couple of weeks, but
Right.
they didn't like doing that anymore, so he's set up in Tennessee. They're hoping the whole family would move there, but I do not believe they will entertain that.
Okay.
And
I'm Stephen Pistrich. I am, I guess, 48 today.
this is
that frightening?
birthday.
Yeah.
Yes,
Not,
a toast.
okay. Otherwise, let's see. I've always known that there's this whole Michelman side of the family, and that's the one that I seem to know most because they seem to have had their origins or in Western Mass for a long time. And my father's family's from Montreal, and before that from Romania, and there's like almost no information available and no one even to talk to anymore. So all the people had any real knowledge of that there are pretty much dead, and I think my mother's probably about the last one of her generation here of that bunch of Michelmans at this point. So that's probably why I've been kind of interested in this. And I've been keeping my eyes open about Michelman stuff because I know there's been a history of them floating around the valley from, you know, whatever, from Greenfield to Springfield and Northampton, and seeing all sorts of stuff from like Michelman Avenue in Northampton to all the gravestones in the cemetery on King Street, and just I know something's going on. And then hearing stories of like how Calvin Coolidge was at grandma's wedding or something, or was it someone?
I heard that.
You heard that? You're the one that told me. And just all these sort of oddsballs, bits of local history stuff mixed in, but never anything really official. Like it's all just some stories and just not. And then I started poking around at some point in some of the local history stuff, like Northampton directories, particularly, because those were easy to reference at the library, and started just looking back. And like the first Michelman, Morris, shows up in Leeds in the 1889-90 directory, and then the next year, suddenly there's Isaac and Morris, both peddlers in Leeds. And then the next year, now there's a whole bunch of them. Plus there's Michelman Brothers Dry Goods and Clothing, and peddlers. And
What street was that?
all right, that's listed as K of H Block, Main Street, Florence. And that's a consortium of Philip Israel and Marx Michelman. Isaac Michelman is a peddler here on Bates Street now. Israel Michael, oh no, these are broken down from the business. There's a Joseph on North Maple in Florence, on Morris, and still in Leeds. So apparently there's suddenly a whole bunch of them, and the next year, it's like they're moving around. They're still mostly in Florence. And then all of a sudden, same year, in East Hampton, Philip has now a store in Cottage Street. And then this is the next year, let's see, Israel moves to New York, and then let's see, there's another store here on Market Street, must be Northampton. Morris has a store there, boots, shoes, and clothing, and dry goods. His home is on Eastern Ave. It's like there's a lot of information. I don't really want to have to read it all off, but it's just interesting how it's sort of growing. They're suddenly moving in from Florence into Northampton. Suddenly a bunch of them are on William Street. There's some key addresses that show up, like where they're like living with each other. Suddenly there's an ad in the directory for Michelman Brothers with a store on Main Street and Market Street, and also in Florence at the Knights of Honor block, which I can't remember which that is, but I tried to find out at one point, and I think I knew. And recombining and different combinations of brothers and cousins or whatever. Someone's a grocer now on Hawley Street. Someone else here has moved to New York City again. Someone went to Ware. Here's another, I was just watching it. They're mostly still dealing in clothing. And then they specifically say
Main Street, 241 Main Street.
And a branch store on Cottage Street in East Hampton.
Uh-huh.
And then here someone's now a clerk, Then there's a number of other, a lot of them opened up separate stores, it looks like, with slightly different addresses. Let's see, here at 1900, suddenly Jacob is a junk dealer on William Street. And it's interesting because looking at other information, there was like a Jewish monopoly on junk dealing on William Street in Northampton, with
around
like
the 1900s?
around 1900, with like 3 or 4 families
All
involved
Jewish.
in it, and they're all Jewish.
Uh-huh. They cornered the market.
Yeah, there's.
Those were the
That's what the Jews went into.
Well, there was various things because
Cottons, rags.
some were selling clothes, and then this other guy got. And the thing is, I think the story was there were 5 brothers from Lithuania who moved to the United States. 4 of them went to Northampton, and 1 went to New York. Ultimately.
The youngest went to New York.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I don't remember their names are here. I don't really know them. I just remember this story. But the deal is that they all then worked together and they created this little scene. And because eventually, I don't know what the relation is, but one of these ads, let's see, definitely starts saying that they have a factory in New York. There's a mention, but no real details. But I don't know what that really referred to. But suddenly there's like another generation showing up, because here's this Samuel, and the names show up of Isaac. What was your grandfather's name? Your
Was Isaac.
Isaac. Okay, because suddenly here's Isaac on William Street in Northampton. The same address as this guy David. It's interesting, like they're all living in various combinations together, which I don't really understand how that worked, but maybe that's what they did.
Each other out, I guess.
Different houses looked like they had different people at different times.
Moving around.
And someone
See, here's this one, Michelman Brothers, Max and Meyer,
Right.
dealers in all this clothing,
Millinery clothing, what else? Furniture goods, hats, caps, boots, shoes, and they're on 31 to 41 Main Street.
Dewey's Block, and our
Right.
clothing factory at
Right,
22
Go ahead, read it.
22 Walker Street, New York City. Now, when it says our, I don't have any idea what that connection is, and that's their their distributor site, or they actually owned it, the family owned it. I have no idea.
I don't either.
I never did any further research, and that was 1903.
Uh-huh.
The key thing is, at 1904, is that that's the first time I have any other evidence of this, is that in the Meadow City Quarter-Millennial book, which was the...
Yeah, I've got a
Yeah,
copy.
you've got a copy. Somewhere,
Are Michelman's mentioned?
there's Samuel is mentioned as being a member of the Improved Order of Redmen and was in the parade.
In Northampton.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then there's a photograph here that it took a long time, but this one, this is the, used to be the Goodwill, that's where Zen is, the Oddfellows Hall. You know, like that building, it has the restaurant, it had, I think that's where Dynamite Records. But I don't know why I just saw this, but I saw the L man here, and well, basically, this says Michelman Brothers. This is their storefront, but all decked out for the parade, and it's the only photograph I guess I've ever seen of anything like that to show that it was really downtown somewhere. And you know, you got to really look in for the fine print, but it does talk about, I think, dry goods and, you know, stuff like that, but it does at least show that it existed somewhere.
What page is that? Page 95. Okay.
And the mention of Samuel is in the little thing about there's all the groups that marched in the parade. The Capewalk tribe of the Improved Order of Redmen.
Uh-huh.
And in there is, let's see, there is Samuel Michelman mentioned on page 280, and that's the only other mention of those guys I saw. But it's interesting that they were, considering there were only a few other Jewish family names that I remember seeing from that period, these are the only ones that really look like started to integrate into Northampton somewhat, because the others just, if you notice all the names of the people involved in this stuff, there's a very few that look either Jewish or, you know, immigrant or anything, you know, like no Polish names at all, you know, stuff like that. So it was just interesting that I guess he was starting to get involved in some stuff, Samuel, which...
He was very active in the town.
Yeah.
He had no family, well, his wife.
And then, in 1905, that's around, like, they started making this B'nai Israel thing. This is the first mention of it in any of the books, is the 1905 one.
Mm-hmm.
And it meets in Dickinson's block on Main Street. It doesn't even have a building. And the president is I. Michelman, the secretary is Meyer Michelman, and the financial secretary is E. Alberts.
Oh, yeah, Leonard Albert's father.
Leonard Albert.
Well, the thing is,
My mother's
his
family.
yeah, her mother's in Alberts.
Your mother's an Albert.
Yeah, Alberts married Michelman, and
Married Louis Michelman.
so they were all in it together.
There was Leonard, trying to remember his wife's name, B.
Bernice. Bernice, yeah.
Because we used to know them, and his cousins.
But there was yeah, the Alberts and Michelmans I've heard of a lot of times, just because I'm...
And Michelman's, I'm getting them twisted, I think.
Okay, so what's next?
Well, let's see, just moving on, people seem to be coming and going. This, as I said, this seems like the Michelman brothers established itself. 37 to 41 Main is, I think, that Oddfellows Hall building for at least a few years. Eventually, here Samuel was referred to as a teamster. All of a sudden. Maybe he was more flamboyant than some of the other shop owner guys. Still talking about now their clothing factories on Bleecker Street in New York.
Interesting.
And let's see what happened. I'm trying to think, there's something else that's sort of interesting that comes up a little later on. Here's our clothing factory is on Broadway next year. I don't know what's going on with that. But where is it? Suddenly, all right, Isaac is now on Butler Place, and I know my mother was talking about They lived on Butler Place in Northampton. They moved to like a nicer house from the ones next to the railroad tracks kind of thing. But suddenly there's like a mention of a Dora. There's like one of this only lists mostly males, but there's occasional women that turn up. But suddenly they seem to be moving around. Here's some. Meyer is now USN.
U.S. Navy?
That's 1919, so that's World War I.
Yeah, okay.
So he was like in the Navy.
Right.
Meyer is listed as residence in Fitchburg.
Uh-huh.
And then here's the first mention in 1920 of Michelman's block on Pleasant Street, which is, I think, where the watering hole is. That funky building with, like, I think it has Northampton Coffee. Was called Michelman's block.
Is his name still on there?
I don't think I see any evidence of it, but
I know what you mean.
it's just,
As you're leaving town.
yeah, 265 to 281 is,
Michelman block, so they built the building. Uh-huh.
I guess, I'm not sure. It would be
Or they bought
1920, or they bought it and took it over. It was just sort of interesting watching them sort of like ultimately, if you realize, if you look here, they've had like, there's a number of Main Street businesses, they own a block, they're like taking over the
So
town.
what became of them? There are no Michelmans left. Do I have that right?
That is, yeah, it does seem that way.
What
There's-
happened to the Michelmans? They had children?
On the corner of Michelman's block is Michelman Avenue, that little dead end.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Do you have any sense of what happened to this family?
after the 20s,
Yeah.
it seems like they dispersed.
You
I don't
look- You
know.
looked in the town records and you don't see them anymore?
Well, gradually they sort of faded by, what's the last one I gave up on?
From Northampton?
1931.
Yeah.
Most of those old names are all dead, I guess, and by 31, there's only a few names that I'm not that familiar with here. Jack Sadie, here's Samuel Ida, the President Treasurer of Northampton Loan and Finance Company, Main
That's what she
Street.
was talking about, too. Yeah.
And Vera is a bookkeeper.
Each of the brothers, I think, ultimately opened, except for Barney. It's not many brothers.
What-
Brothers opened a
Savings and loan, it sounds like.
something like that.
They were involved in loan companies, because didn't Isaac, your brother, do something with loans too at some point?
Finally.
Like that was maybe that turned into the family business, ultimately, was somehow loans, after being peddlers and shop owners.
Bert?
And then they started to move around, though. I mean, like, because Isaac,
Well, the elder children went off to college and perhaps opened their own branch of such a company. At least
but I think maybe they got out of Northampton because it wasn't big enough time. They,
not for all of them to be.
yeah, it's like they took over,
One went
they,
to Pittsfield, and his sons ultimately.
someone was in Brattleboro, right?
Then there was the clothing store owner, Barney, went, well, he was in Greenfield, I think I would say he's remained there. But one son went into some form of medicine, but he was out of state. The other one, Ralph, went to ultimately to Brattleboro and opened up a clothing store there, and he remained there. And he had one son, and the son lives in New Hampshire. I believe it's New Hampshire. He became a school teacher.
So tell me, what do you do for a living? Give us your name again.
Stephen?
Stephen, what do you do for a living? Having heard all this generational thing?
He's looking for work.
What did you do for a living?
I usually tell people I design and build things,
Uh-huh.
because at the moment I'm a licensed building contractor right now, but I do more than just that. But I do that a lot. That's a more formally,
Right.
I actually probably have an ad in the phone book or something about that.
Right.
But it's not exclusively just working on houses. I mean, I do a lot of fine woodworking and other sort of odd projects. And
But you make beautiful furniture.
yeah, I did do a fine woodworking thing for a number of years, but couldn't sell enough furniture to make a living, although I was doing like shows in New York, and it was at a good level that it could have worked at, but just wasn't working. Yeah, but that is, I guess, what I'm doing now is working on buildings and houses and doing restoration work and assorted stuff like that. And if people want to hire me to build some furniture, I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it on spec right now.
What is your name?
It's Michael
Yeah. And what are you, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up?
in Longmeadow.
And what was it like growing up in Longmeadow?
I don't have much recollection. It's fairly uneventful place to grow up in.
This is that article that
Yeah.
made me...
And what are you doing now for a living?
Generally done publishing work related to textbooks, though currently I'm not actively engaged in that
You taking care of your mom?
at the time being.
Full-time.
Full-time.
Excellent. I'm sorry.
Is there anything else you'd like to contribute to this discussion?
Sounds like most of the
My mother talks too much.
remembered anecdotes I think have already come out,
You can't
though
remember anything.
periodically she'll randomly come up with some interesting details. It's hard to predict under a kind of formal interview process how that would go.
But I
Okay.
neglected to tell you how important my holding.
Yeah, what did your father do?
He was involved in a, no, that doesn't sound right. Sounds very serious. He had a loan business
Uh-huh.
that he was able to function, maintain a living from, but he wasn't with it very long. So he had a rather short life. But he was adamantly opposed to much of the Bethel Temple philosophy, and they were seriously considering a merger with Sinai Temple, which would erase them virtually from the scheme of things in the city. And my father was so determined that the, should we say, the stricter tenets of the religion should be maintained. He had had his membership with Kadima, as I had described to you, and so he fought for that, and was able to hold a line so that they didn't give up their conservatism and merge
With
with
the
the.
reforms that he got.
That's right, because it was going to become Sinai Temple.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if anybody, of course, is around any longer.
Right, I've never heard
who
about that,
runs.
so that's something
No,
I'm going
I'm
to
sure not.
investigate.
I described it to Rabbi Schwartz, our previous rabbi. The new rabbi, I've greeted her, introduced myself, but that's something else that won't develop. But it was a very difficult battle all his life with Bethel Temple.
Thank you for
But he was
sharing
the what do we call it, chairman, I suppose, of the ritual committee.
that. Mhm.
So he was the guiding light for maintaining the Jewishness, the strong.
I think I've seen his name on that the brass names on the
A
plaque
plaque.
in Bethel, like it's one of like
It's-
the
it's-
founding
Uh-huh.
group.
It's possible.
Or something like
I
that.
don't know. Of course, I haven't done much to try to maintain his, what should we call it, not notoriety,
Uh-huh.
but his place in the existence of